My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment, because something has shifted in a way you cannot yet see. What you are about to hear was meant to reach the part of you that has been asking silent questions, the part that has wondered why the atmosphere around your heart has felt different lately. There is something waiting beneath the surface of this story, and before you assume you already know what it is, stay here. The truth is not what it first appears to be. Your soulmate received news about you that struck them far more deeply than they expected. It was not simply a sentence they heard and then forgot. It was not a passing rumor that disappeared with the next distraction. Something about what they discovered forced them to stop. Their thoughts scattered. Their breathing changed. For a few moments, the world around them continued moving, but they did not. And what shook them was not only the news itself. It was what the news made them realize. There are moments when a person learns something and suddenly sees the past differently. A conversation that once seemed ordinary becomes important. A silence that once felt confusing suddenly makes sense. A distance they once misunderstood begins to carry an entirely different meaning. That is what happened here. Your soulmate began connecting pieces they had kept separated for far too long. They remembered your patience. They remembered the moments when you could have demanded answers but chose silence instead. They remembered times when you smiled even though something inside you was clearly heavier than you were willing to admit. And then came the realization that unsettled them most. You may have been carrying more alone than they ever understood. That thought entered their heart quietly, but it did not remain quiet for long. It became impossible to ignore. They began asking themselves questions they had avoided before. How many times had you needed someone to notice without having to explain? How many nights had you stared into the darkness wondering whether anyone truly understood what your heart was trying to survive? How many times had you been strong simply because there was no other choice? Your soulmate does not know every detail. That is important. They do not suddenly possess some supernatural map of everything you have experienced. But what they learned was enough to awaken something in them that had been sleeping. Compassion. Regret. Protectiveness. And something deeper that they are still struggling to name. This is why they are shaken. Not because heaven is showing them tragedy for the sake of fear, but because truth has a way of breaking through the walls people build around their emotions. Sometimes a person can care about you and still fail to understand you. Sometimes they can love the idea of being close to you while remaining unaware of the battles you quietly fought. But when understanding finally arrives, everything changes. Your soulmate is beginning to understand. And there is more. They are also remembering something you said long ago. Perhaps you do not even remember saying it. Maybe it was a small sentence spoken during an ordinary conversation. Maybe it was something you tried to laugh away. Maybe you changed the subject immediately afterward because you did not want anyone asking questions. But they remember. And now those words sound completely different to them. What once seemed casual now feels like a clue. What once sounded like strength now sounds like someone trying not to reveal how tired they were. And that realization is sitting heavily in their chest. They keep returning to one particular memory. A moment when you could have told them everything. You could have placed the full weight of your heart in front of them. But you did not. And they are finally wondering why. Was it because you did not trust them? Was it because you believed they would not understand? Or was it because somewhere along the way, you became so accustomed to carrying things alone that asking for support began to feel unfamiliar? That question is haunting them more than the original news. Because now they are realizing this story may not only be about what happened to you. It may also be about what they failed to notice. And that is where the emotion became overwhelming. They started replaying your presence in their life with new eyes. They remembered the times you showed kindness even when you were tired. The times you listened to others while your own heart remained unheard. The times you offered reassurance while secretly needing reassurance yourself. And suddenly they saw the contradiction. You had been giving from places inside you that may have already been exhausted. That realization changed the entire emotional landscape between you. Something inside them whispered, "How did I not see it?" And another thought followed immediately. What else have I misunderstood? That question opened a door. Behind it were memories they had pushed aside because facing them felt uncomfortable. Times they judged your silence too quickly. Times they assumed your distance meant indifference. Times they interpreted your caution as coldness. Times they wondered why you did not simply say what you felt. But now they are beginning to see that a guarded heart is not always an unloving heart. Sometimes it is a heart that learned to survive disappointment. Sometimes it is a heart that learned not to expect too much because expectation once became painful. Sometimes it is a heart that loves deeply but reveals itself carefully. And your soulmate is starting to understand that difference. The truth unsettled them because it removed one of the explanations they had been using to protect themselves. For a long time, they may have told themselves that you did not care enough. That you were too distant. Too complicated. Too difficult to read. But if the truth is that you cared while carrying hidden weight, then suddenly their entire interpretation begins to collapse. That is why they are still shaken. Not because they are afraid of you. Because they are afraid of how wrong they may have been about you. There is a difference. And heaven wants you to understand that difference. Do not rush ahead in your mind. Do not turn this message into a prediction that forces you to wait anxiously for someone. Let it unfold as a spiritual story about truth, awareness, and the way genuine understanding can transform the heart. Because something even more important is happening beneath their reaction. Your soulmate is being confronted with themselves. The news about you became a mirror. They saw their own hesitation. Their own pride. Their own assumptions. Their own moments of emotional avoidance. And this is where the story becomes deeper. When someone truly cares about you, learning that you struggled does not only make them sad. It makes them wonder whether they contributed to your loneliness without realizing it. That question entered their mind. And they could not easily dismiss it. They remembered the message they did not send. The question they wanted to ask but avoided. The moment they almost reached out and then convinced themselves not to. They remembered times when instinct told them something was different about you, but they ignored that instinct because they did not want to seem vulnerable. And now? Now they are wondering whether those moments mattered more than they realized. There is one memory in particular that keeps returning. You were quieter than usual. Something in your energy had changed. They noticed it. Maybe only for a second. But they noticed. And instead of asking what was wrong, they allowed the moment to pass. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Now it does not. Now they are asking themselves what might have happened if they had stayed in that moment a little longer. What if they had asked twice? What if they had listened differently? What if they had understood that sometimes the words, "I'm fine," are not an ending, but a doorway someone is hoping another person will gently open? That realization has become one of the reasons they cannot stop thinking about you. But the most powerful revelation has not happened yet. Because your soulmate is beginning to see that what they heard about you is connected to something they have been feeling for a long time. An unexplained pull. A sense that something between you remained unfinished. A strange emotional awareness that surfaced at unexpected moments. They may have tried to dismiss it. They may have told themselves it was nostalgia. They may have buried themselves in routines, conversations, responsibilities, or distractions. But there were moments when your memory arrived without invitation. And now they are wondering whether those moments were trying to tell them something. Not that destiny removes free will. Not that every connection must become a relationship. But perhaps that certain people enter our emotional world to reveal parts of ourselves we would otherwise never confront. And you have revealed something in them. You have exposed the difference between caring silently and showing up courageously. They are realizing that love, if it is real, cannot survive forever as an unspoken feeling protected by fear. Eventually, love demands honesty. Eventually, compassion demands action. Eventually, understanding demands that someone stop hiding behind excuses. Your soulmate is reaching that threshold now. And this is where the shaking becomes something else. It becomes awakening. They are not merely reacting to information anymore. They are confronting a choice. Will they remain the person who watches from a distance? Or will they become the person who finally speaks? That choice is beginning to press against their heart. And something extraordinary happened when they tried to ignore it. The harder they pushed the feeling away, the stronger one particular thought became. I need to know if they are okay. Simple words. But they carried enormous weight. Because beneath that sentence was another one they were not ready to admit. I still care. And beneath that was something deeper. Maybe I never stopped. This is the truth they are struggling with now. The devastating part of the news was not only hearing that you had endured something difficult. It was discovering that their feelings were still alive enough for that truth to affect them this deeply. They thought they had greater control over their emotions. They thought time had made everything easier. They thought distance had answered the questions. But one revelation about you brought everything back to the surface. And now their heart feels exposed. They are beginning to understand why certain connections cannot be measured only by how often two people speak. Sometimes the deepest connection is revealed by what happens internally when one person learns the other has been hurting. Suddenly, priorities shift. Pride becomes smaller. Old arguments seem less important. Misunderstandings lose their power. And the heart asks one question: what actually matters now? Your soulmate is asking that question. And they are not comfortable with the answer. Because the answer may require courage. It may require an apology. It may require admitting that they were wrong. It may require explaining why they disappeared emotionally when they should have moved closer. It may require telling you something they have never said aloud. And that is what has them pacing mentally between the past and the future. One moment they want to reach out. The next moment fear stops them. Then concern pushes them forward again. Then doubt pulls them back. Their mind is full of possibilities. What if you no longer want to hear from them? What if too much time has passed? What if you have changed? What if their concern arrives too late? But then another thought interrupts every excuse. What if silence becomes the greatest regret? That thought is changing everything. Because sometimes people do not act when they first discover how much someone means to them. They act when they realize they may lose the opportunity to express it. And your soulmate is approaching that realization. Something in them knows that continuing exactly as before is no longer possible. The news altered the emotional balance. They cannot unknow what they now understand. They cannot return to the comfortable version of the story where they assumed you were unaffected. They cannot easily convince themselves that your silence meant you felt nothing. Because now there is evidence of a deeper truth. You were living a story they could not see. And they may have been interpreting the cover while missing the pages underneath. But listen carefully, because there is something heaven wants to say directly to your heart within this fictional message. You do not need someone else's regret to validate what you survived. You do not need anyone to finally understand before your pain becomes real. You do not need your soulmate, a friend, a family member, or anyone else to recognize your strength before that strength counts. There were moments when you kept going without applause. There were nights when no one knew what your thoughts sounded like. There were mornings when you rose and carried responsibilities despite feeling emotionally drained. That mattered. You mattered. And whether another person understood it then or understands it now, the truth of your journey remains unchanged. But this story is showing you something powerful. Sometimes people understand us late. And late understanding can still create real transformation. Not because the past disappears, but because awareness gives people the opportunity to behave differently in the future. Your soulmate is standing before that opportunity. They can choose defensiveness or humility. They can choose silence or honesty. They can protect their ego or protect what still matters to their heart. And right now, their emotions are pushing them toward a truth they have avoided. There is something they need to tell you. Something bigger than, "I'm sorry." Something more vulnerable than, "I was worried." Something they almost admitted once before, then swallowed at the last moment. You may not know this, but there was a time when they came dangerously close to revealing everything. They had the words. They imagined the conversation. They rehearsed how they would begin. But fear interfered. They wondered whether you would reject them. They wondered whether the timing was wrong. They wondered whether revealing their feelings would make them look foolish. So they remained silent. And silence became distance. Distance became assumptions. Assumptions became an entire story that neither of you fully understood. But the news they received has brought them back to that unfinished moment. They keep thinking, should have said it then. And what is astonishing is that they are not only remembering their unsent words. They are remembering yours. There was a signal. A subtle one. Something you said or did that they once dismissed. But now, in the light of everything they have learned, they are questioning whether you were trying to reach them emotionally without saying it directly. Maybe you lingered in a conversation. Maybe you asked a question that carried more meaning than they understood. Maybe you became distant after they failed to respond in the way you hoped. At the time, they did not see it. Now they do. And that realization hit them almost as hard as the news itself. Because suddenly they are wondering whether both of you were standing on opposite sides of the same fear. Both caring. Both waiting. Both interpreting silence as rejection. Both hoping the other would become brave first. If that is true, then this connection was not destroyed by the absence of feeling. It may have been stalled by the presence of fear. And that possibility is shaking them to the core. They are beginning to ask themselves whether this story still has an unfinished chapter. But heaven is not telling you to chase. Do not misunderstand the message. You are not being asked to prove yourself. You are not being asked to send desperate messages, abandon your boundaries, or place your entire emotional future in another person's hands. The deeper lesson is this. What belongs in your life must meet you with honesty. Real connection cannot survive on mystery forever. At some point, someone has to step out from behind the silence. And your soulmate is beginning to feel that responsibility. They know that if they approach you, they cannot approach casually. Not after what they learned. Not after what it awakened in them. They cannot simply pretend nothing happened. They would have to speak from the heart. They would have to tell you what they know. They would have to explain what they misunderstood. And perhaps most importantly, they would have to answer the question you may have been carrying for far longer than they realize. Why did you leave me wondering? That question frightens them because they know the answer may expose their deepest insecurity. They did not always stay silent because they did not care. Sometimes they stayed silent because they cared too much and did not know what to do with the intensity of it. Sometimes people become distant from what matters most because closeness forces them to confront the possibility of loss. And your soulmate has been carrying that contradiction. Wanting closeness. Fearing closeness. Missing you. Avoiding you. Thinking about you. Trying not to think about you. It made no sense to them until now. But now the news has stripped away their emotional defenses. They cannot hide behind confusion much longer. And there is another layer you need to hear. Someone else may have noticed their reaction. Your soulmate tried to appear composed, but their face betrayed them. Their silence lasted too long. Their attention disappeared from the room. Someone may have asked, "Are you okay?" And your soulmate gave an answer that did not reveal the truth. But inside, they were asking a completely different question. How could I have not known? This question is becoming the center of everything. Because now they feel the urge to learn the full story. Not out of curiosity. Out of care. They want to understand what you experienced. They want to know when it began. They want to know how long you carried it. They want to know who stood beside you. And somewhere underneath all those questions is the one that hurts the most. Why wasn't I there? That is the question they cannot escape. But something happened after that. Something unexpected. Their mind returned to a promise they once made privately. A promise they never told you about. At some point in the past, your soulmate decided that if they ever got another chance to speak honestly with you, they would not waste it. Life moved on. Time passed. The promise faded into the background. But it never disappeared. And now it has resurfaced. Stronger than before. The news about you awakened it. They are beginning to remember exactly what they wanted to say. And those words are not what you might expect. They are not dramatic. They are not perfect. They are painfully simple. I wish you had known you did not have to carry everything alone. That sentence is sitting inside them now. And there is another sentence behind it. I wish I had been brave enough to show you I cared. But the greatest revelation is still hidden. Because there is something about the news itself that your soulmate has not fully understood yet. A detail. A connection. A piece of information that did not seem important when they first heard it. Later, they began thinking about it again. And suddenly it connected to something from the past. Something involving you. Something involving them. Something neither of you realized was connected at all. That is the moment the story changed from emotional to extraordinary. Your soulmate stopped thinking only about what happened to you. They began thinking about why this information reached them now. Why after all this time? Why through this particular person? Why in this particular way? And the more they thought about it, the more one old memory returned. A conversation. A warning. A sentence someone once said about the two of you. At the time, your soulmate laughed it off. Now they are not laughing. Because the person who delivered the news recently said almost the exact same words. Your soulmate noticed the similarity. Their entire body went still. They remembered where they were when they first heard those words years ago. They remembered your face. They remembered what happened immediately afterward. And then a terrifyingly beautiful realization entered their mind. Maybe the moment they thought ended everything between you was never actually the ending. Maybe it was the beginning of something neither of you understood yet. Their hands trembled as they reached for their phone. They opened your name. They stared at it. For several seconds, they did nothing. Then they began typing. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted that too. Because the message they wanted to send could not be casual anymore. Too much had changed. Too much had been revealed. They knew they had only one chance to say this correctly. So instead of sending anything, they closed their eyes and returned to that old memory one more time. And that is when they remembered the part they had forgotten. The exact words you said just before everything between you changed. Words that seemed meaningless then. Words that now appear to explain nearly everything. Your soulmate whispered those words to themselves, and suddenly they understood why the news about you had found them at this exact moment. They understood what they needed to tell you. They understood what they had been running from. But then one final detail surfaced. A detail they were never supposed to know. A detail about what happened after the two of you last truly opened your hearts to each other. And when your soulmate discovered who had been keeping that truth from them all this time, they stopped shaking from sadness. They began shaking from realization. Because the person connected to the news was not a stranger. Your soulmate knows them. And what this person finally revealed about you is about to change everything your soulmate believed happened between you.